So I am Carol Walker coming to you from my podcast, Freedom for Wild Horses. And I am absolutely delighted today to have as my guest Susan Wagner, who is the founder of Equine Advocates back in 1996. And in 2006, she has since then, she has had a sanctuary in New York where she's rescued thousands of equines from slaughter, abuse, and neglect. And it's a 140-acre facility. I've been there. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And they take such good care of the horses. And it's also a humane education center. And I first met Susan when I went to it was a meeting for wild horse advocacy. And got to know her there. And it's a fabulous place for people to learn about how to humanely treat horses and the evils of slaughter and neglect that happen to far too many of our equines. And she's also a tremendous advocate for wild horses, which I so much appreciate. So thank you for being here, Susan. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me at this critical time, because it truly is a critical time. And I want to thank you for all your advocacy and your brilliant talent in photographing these majestic animals and showing people why it is so important that they be preserved and protected and not rounded up and sent to slaughter or even ending up in captivity where they do not belong. You're an amazing advocate and one of the most wonderful people I know, one of my favorite people. And I just wanted to tell you, I founded the organization, as you know, because of this horse slaughter issue.
Yes.
My first horse from slaughter in 1993, and founded the organization 3 years later. Then 19 years ago, in 2004, we established the sanctuary, and in 2006, we opened the Humane Education Center. So it's been a real process, but my main mission over all this time, over these past 30 years really, and the 27 that I've been operating Equine Advocates, is to see an end to horse slaughter once and for all. But sadly, that's not going to happen with the current legislation that was introduced as an amendment to the Farm Bill of 2023.
Yes. So that's what we're here to talk about today is the SAFE Act, the Save America's Forgotten Equines Act. And it's now in its current form for 2023, and it's been changed over how it's been in the past. And Susan is really wanting to get the word out today about how the changes have affected how the bill is going to be implemented and what we need to do to stop that.
Okay. Well, the SAFE Act has been around for a very long time and never passed. Okay. So how to end horse slaughter. My good friend, colleague, and mentor, Kathleen Doyle, who, in my opinion, is the foremost expert on the passage of humane equine legislation in America. She's passed multiple bills, including the horse tripping bill, and then, of course, that amazing state initiative, the first state initiative in the nation to ban the slaughter of horses in California, which has the biggest equine population in the nation, the biggest human population in the nation, and is the biggest agribusiness state in the nation. So she had done that. That was in 1998. And one of the great experiences of my life was to have been there on Election Day, November 3rd, 1998, as the returns came in, and it was over 60% of the electorate. And, you know, then Kathleen would say to me, well, as California goes, so goes the nation. It's only a matter of time before we have a federal bill. But unfortunately, that was not to be. And what we have now is so substandard that we certainly cannot allow it to pass as currently drafted. The number of the bill is H.R. 3475, which is how it's been introduced to the House as an amendment to the Farm Bill of 2023, which is expected to pass in September. Okay. So what's happened is Kathleen approached the sponsors of the bill and said she had a great idea. And of course, because as brilliant as she is, said, why don't we amend the dog and cat slaughter bill that was passed in 2018, and I don't have the exact name of it in front of me, even though I've been looking at it now for anyhow. A great bill passed in 2018 that banned the slaughter of dogs and cats for food.
Yes.
And so her thinking was, why don't we amend that bill, that amendment that passed in, it was passed as an amendment to the Farm Bill 5 years ago, 2018, and to include horses.
Yes.
And so what I'd love for viewers and listeners to do is when this show is over, to just go to our website, equineadvocates.org, where we will be posting a copy of the legislation, the language that she submitted to the Animal Action Wellness or Animal Wellness Action Group that are the sponsors of the bill.
Right.
And so apparently they looked at this and eventually thought, well, yes, this is a good way to go about it. But they didn't go about it in the way that we all had hoped. As you know, I'm a New Yorker and am very, very proud of the fact that just a short while ago, New York passed the best anti-horse slaughter legislation ever. And that is because it bans the slaughter of both horses for human and animal consumption.
Right.
And because things have changed over the years, and the other 4 states that have anti-horse slaughter legislation only had it for human consumption, but things have changed now because of the wild horse issue, because of the feral horse issue. It now endangers horses out west as much as domestic horses because the number of domestic horses going to slaughter has decreased a lot.
Yes.
Yes. So, but slaughter is slaughter, no matter whether they're wild or feral or domestic or whatever. Slaughter is slaughter. It doesn't make a difference to the horses if they're being eaten by animals or humans, or if they're slaughtered in custom slaughterhouses or regular slaughterhouses. We need federal legislation to ban it outright, and that is what the New York bill or a state bill has done. So you would have thought that the federal bill would be mirroring what New York did, but instead it does not. Instead, it only addresses human consumption and export, and there is absolutely nothing to prevent a truck full of horses from going to the Mexican border and saying, oh, we're sending the horses over for pet food.
Right.
And there's absolutely no law to prevent them from going over, and then what happens, happens. So this bill...
And currently, just to remind people, there are no slaughterhouses in the United States. And the only way that horses are going to slaughter right now is that they're being exported to Mexico or Canada.
That's true. And so what this bill does not do, you can tell more about it, what it doesn't do, by what it actually says. But they removed the language that Kathleen Doyle submitted, which is to prohibit the slaughter of dogs, cats, and horses for human and animal consumption. And she also had a clause in there about intrastate commerce, which prevents the slaughter, transfer, and transportation of horses within an individual state. So the sponsors removed those things. And so they have a bill that only addresses human consumption and export, but doesn't protect horses from being slaughtered in custom slaughterhouses on Indian reservations. And I sent you a couple of documents, and we will post these as well. There's a group called the National Congress of American Indians. Okay, in 2013, they posted a resolution entitled Opposition to Any and All Horse Anti-Slaughter Acts. So Kathleen has tried to reach out to them several weeks ago to find out if they still stand by this resolution, and has heard nothing, even though she was promised someone would call her. So if we don't hear anything, we have to assume that they still are standing by this, and this represents all the tribes. But then, as early as May of 2022, George Menenak, who is the chairman of the National Tribal Horse Coalition, issued a letter to several members of Congress, including one of the sponsors of the SAFE Act, and that would be Jan Schakowsky of Illinois, that basically mirrors what the resolution says. So the intent of what the tribes would like to do is no secret. they would like to slaughter horses on the reservations. And so the reason for slaughter has sort of changed. It's more of a disposal bill now to get rid of feral, wild, and even domestic horses again, if there's no stopping anyone from taking horses to a reservation for slaughter if they have access to getting to one, and these horses will just disappear. So
Right. And especially since the intrastate part had gotten removed. So, you can't send them to Canada or Mexico, but you could ship them to tribal lands for slaughter.
yeah, so the intrastate commerce clause was put in by Kathleen. The animal consumption part was removed by them in the current bill. So there's no protecting these horses. If this bill gets passed, it is not going to end horse slaughter. I
Right.
mean, people need to know that. And because it's so vague,
Yeah.
people looking at this bill will say, oh, well, this bill ends the slaughter of horses for human consumption. I'm supporting it. But it doesn't really end horse slaughter unless you include animal consumption in it as well.
Right. And remove the ability to do custom slaughterhouses.
Yeah. I mean, those of us who have been involved with this issue for more than 30 years, for me, it's 30 years, but there are other people who've been involved with it longer.
Yes.
We sense that a dirty deal is going on here, going down, because we think that there was some kind of trade-off
Uh-huh.
for doing that. I mean, I can't think of any other reason. And to be frank, Kathleen has communicated with Wayne Pacelli of the Animal Wellness Action and asked him who is opposing having animal consumption in there, because he had indicated to her somehow, I don't have it verbatim, but he indicated to her that somehow there was some opposition to it. And they went around and around. And at the end of the day, we still don't know who it is who's objecting. So in my mind, there is some sort of deal made, and in a lot of other people's minds also, with somebody in horse industry, whether it's or in the livestock industry, whether it's the cattlemen or the Native American tribes, or
Maybe the BLM. Who knows?
the BLM.
Maybe they're wanting a better way to get rid of all these 60,000 plus wild horses that they have in holding.
Yeah, and we've seen what some of these backdoor deals have led to. Look at the Burns Amendment.
Yes.
I remember when it passed in the fall of 2004.
Yes.
And I remember some senators saying, well, we can reverse it. And there was, I think, one or two attempts to reverse it, and it never happened. It was a big nail in the coffin of wild horses and burros.
Yes, it has been.
Not very long ago, this whole thing started really in Colorado last year, and you're in Colorado, so you know what I'm talking about. There was a very bad bill that thankfully did not pass that was going to ban the slaughter of Colorado horses for human consumption, but said very clearly there was an exemption for safe harbors and secondary markets. And that was so that horses in the state could be sold for slaughter to sanctuaries and preserves or for pet food. It was right there in black and white. And thankfully, it did not pass. So the federal bill does not get that explicit. They kind of left that out, but it doesn't prohibit it. So I guess they learned their lesson from saying too much in the Colorado bill. So now they've turned around and, they just have, it's just very vague. It does one thing only, human consumption, export, and that's it, but does not protect horses from any other form of slaughter. And as we said, it doesn't really matter what you're slaughtering horses for. If you want to ban horse slaughter, then you have to go all the way.
Yes. So I think this is so important for people to know, because so many people I know are just saying, pass a safe act, pass a safe act. It'll save all the wild horses. It'll save the horses. And they don't know this. They don't know that there are loopholes here that are really going to undo all the good work that people like you and Kathleen and all the other people have been working for so long. And I think it's really important to know that you can't just blindly support this bill and think that it's going to solve all the problems. It's not.
Well, there is some good news here. The good news is that it can be amended.
Yes, that is the best news.
So I'm for doing that, but I'm also for opposing the bill and killing the bill if it goes in as currently drafted. I'd rather have no bill than a bad bill, but we don't have to have a bad bill. We can fix this. And if people involved agree to amend the bill, then we will be supporting it wholeheartedly. Carol, as you know, and I know you're very familiar with the path forward, there is a big difference between animal welfare organizations and humane animal organizations. It only makes sense that lawmakers prefer to deal with welfare groups because they tend more to favor industry as opposed to humane groups that don't. And if you look at, when I first read the Path Forward, which, by the way, passed in 2016, it's one of the most disastrous governmental policies to affect wild horses and burros. If you look at the people supporting it and the group supporting it, the first thing I said to myself was, these are strange bedfellows. But you have to look at what they're actually doing. And it was not a benefit to wild horses and burros at all. And
no, it was basically catering to the ag and the livestock industry, and with the idea that, well, if we can get them to use more birth control, things will be better for the wild horses. But that's not the case. It wasn't a compromise. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. So when you look at, I think Chris Stewart, who's a representative from the state of Utah, was maybe
mercifully leaving right now.
Yeah, replace him. But he's probably the biggest horse slaughter proponent in the House of Representatives.
Yes.
He got on a stage with the new Interior Secretary, who has refused to get rid of the Path Forward.
And it was refused to meet with any advocacy groups in support of wild horses.
And I think that, I think she has ranchers in her family. That's at least what I've heard. But yeah, she's been very bad for the horses. And so she's together with him. And some of these other groups are also in compliance with this policy. So people need to look at who's supporting what and why. And I think when you said just before, Carol, that some of them support industry and the livestock industry and the evisceration of wild horses and burros, that could explain who might be behind what's going on with this horse slaughter ban.
Yes, because right now the language around wild horses is their populations are exploding.
Yeah.
We can't afford to keep them in holding facilities, but of course they're continuing to round up more horses starting yesterday. Yes, so they need a convenient way to dispose of the horses, and this is what I have been afraid of ever since the Burns Amendment passed. That at some point they're going to point to 60,000 plus wild horses in holding and the millions and millions of dollars that are spent to feed them and house them, and say, we really need to get rid of these.
We have some wild horses here at our sanctuary.
Yes, I've met two of them.
Yeah. We have another one who came here last year. She was part of the Oniki Roundup a couple of years ago. Her estimated age when she was rounded up is 16. She was purchased at a BLM online auction for under $200 and went to a home in upstate New York. There were 300 horses captured during that roundup, and I seriously question how many are still alive. Because if they were sold to people in that manner, the person who adopted her or bought her at this auction had a lot more than he could handle and wasn't going to keep her. And so we were asked to take her, and we did. And we are working with the magnificent Anna Twinney, and we've done amazing things with her. But I mean, I feel bad for these wild horses every day because they seriously do not belong in captivity. I mean, she's she's a very bright horse. She's very smart. We want to do everything we can to make her happy, but I know that this is not the range. We're going to do the best we can for her here so that she can run with her own little herd here on the property, and we're almost there. But when you look at an individual face of a horse and see that this is what we're doing to these animals, and even worse.
And worse with the adoption incentive right now. So the BLM gives $1,000 to adopt a horse. They did make changes to it. They now you have to wait until the year is up and you've got title before you get the $1,000. But what's happening is people are dumping these horses after they get their $1,000 at auction, getting more money at auction, and these horses are ending up in the slaughter pipeline. And these horses should never have been removed from the range in the first place.
Yeah. Well, one of the things about the New York bill, as you know, New York is a border state, and there are 4 slaughterhouses for horses in Canada. There are 2 in Quebec and 2 in Alberta, all the way out west. So New York was known as the horse slaughter highway into Canada because we had trucks coming in from Pennsylvania and Ohio, using our state to send horses to the slaughterhouse. So an enforcement would also have been difficult, if all we had was banning horses for human consumption, because then people could go over and say they're sending them over for pet food. And the police would not have or the law enforcement would not have an easy way of enforcing the law.
Right.
But as passed, once the governor signs it, nobody's going to be able to get over.
Yes.
Unless you have the proper documentation that you're sending horses over for another reason, that's going to end the slaughter of horses, period, for any purpose. And that's why I love that bill so much. And we could do the same thing on a federal level. We can do it. I mean, I don't know if this was just a moment in time or what, but the heads of the 2 agriculture committees in the New York State Assembly and Senate both love horses, and both do not regard horses as food. They're not bred for food. We don't eat them in this country, and especially with domestic horses, they're filled with drugs that are toxic for humans. That almost all horse meat from domestic horses is contaminated and often toxic. So that was the right thing to do. But there's absolutely no reason not to have the same provisions in a federal bill.
Right, exactly. So, so what do you say to people who think the bill as it is better than having no bill at all?
Well, I disagree very strongly, because this is not going to end horse slaughter. And believe me, once we have reservations with horse slaughter plants, we'll never get rid of it. And it will just be going on, and then people will say, oh, but horses are still being slaughtered. Well, because the bill did not include the slaughter of any equine,
right,
for any purpose. So we have the opportunity to do that now.
Okay.
Cory Booker, who is a big advocate for animals, he's also happens to be a strict vegan. He supports this bill, but I wonder if he even realizes what this bill actually is and what it does and doesn't do. So I think that we need
to contact him, obviously, and get him on board.
We need some activism here. We need everybody who cares about this issue, whether you mostly are involved with wild horses, domestic horses. In this case, horses are horses, and we don't want any of them slaughtered. So the main thing is we need.
And then in my state, Jonah Goose is a tremendous wild horse advocate and cares about horses, and so he's my representative. And of course, he needs to know that as well.
Absolutely. So we should all post information that can be readily available. We're working on a fact sheet. I will get it to you.
And it will be on my website with the podcast so that you can access that.
Yes. And everybody needs to. We were also going to post the names of all the members of both agriculture committees in the House and Senate. So the first thing to do is look and see if your member of Congress is on that committee, because that is really important, because they have not marked up the bill yet.
Okay.
And they can still amend it to
Yes.
be a really good bill instead of a really bad substandard bill.
Yes.
So that's what we have to concentrate on. So people need to contact their members of Congress in the House and in the Senate. And I think if we can do that, and if people really get involved, that they will take a second look at it. Because at this point, I don't think they really realize what this bill does and doesn't do.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So the main points that you would say are important to cover would be, first of all, that for it needs to be not just for human consumption, but for um,
Human and animal consumption.
animal consumption as well. So
Yeah.
human and animal consumption banned. And then what about the interstate transportation?
Well, there needs to be a clause that addresses interstate commerce, and that's it. It's just you've got interstate and intrastate. That's all. You know,
Correct.
I mean, when you ban it for animal consumption, that's pretty much the case anyway. It's just better to say it. But
Yes.
the main component is to ban it for human and animal consumption.
And not just, also, doesn't the current bill just say commercial? And you're saying that there are ways to have a custom slaughterhouse, not just a commercial slaughterhouse. So that needs to be spelled out as well.
Yeah, absolutely, because that's what would happen on the reservations. And because Indian tribes have to adhere to federal legislation, but not state. You know more about this than I do. But if a bill this vague gets passed, there won't be anything in it to prevent them from constructing custom slaughterhouses on the reservations. And I think and that's going to lead to massive slaughter of feral horses that is already happening. You know, these things don't really get publicized, and they should. And wild horses in burrows, and then possibly also domestic horses.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can fix it though. I mean, I'm hopeful that we can fix it, but I wonder why this happened, why this bill was introduced as it was. And it was done kind of quietly, as it seems like when New York was voting on its bill, this federal bill was sort of introduced very quietly. And it doesn't even resemble what New York did. If New York can do it, then we can do it in the federal government. There is no reason not to.
Right.
So this is what we have to demand, that all horse slaughter is banned, not just for human consumption.
Right. And has there been any sort of bill introduced in the Senate at this point?
There has been, but right now, yes, there is. And I'll have that information on the website as well. There is a Senate version. Yes.
And does it have the same clause?
It's exactly the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
misleading.
We need to talk to the Senate as well then.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as we go forward, we have a special page that's going up on our homepage, and we'll have people can just click on it and read all the information. And we hope that other organizations will do the same. Either you can use ours or come up with your own, but it's really important that everybody get together. We're also going to form a list of groups and prominent individuals involved in wild and domestic horse protection. And the more supporters we have, the more that we'll be able to let our lawmakers know that, you know, we're in the majority. You know, I heard a poll result that something like over 80% of Americans oppose horse slaughter. So that's a given. In any poll that's ever been taken, it's always the majority of Americans oppose horse slaughter.
Right.
So now we have the opportunity to do what the American people want, and we're not. And there's no reason not to.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just to let everybody know, her website is equineadvocates.org, correct? Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
you can get the information there, and it will also be on my website with the podcast. And we're going to have our the talking points and everything like that for you as well.
Well, we have a lot of work to do, Carol, but I think we can do it. We just have to get the word out. And I think a grassroots movement sometimes is very effective. And
Yes.
again, like I've said before, for those of us who have been fighting for this for decades,
Yes.
after all this time, to end up with something this bad is not what our horses deserve. We have to give them, we have to do for them what they deserve, which is protection from slaughter of any kind without any exemptions and exceptions and loopholes. Just do it. And that's what we need to do.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Susan. I really appreciate all your knowledge and your passion for our horses in this country. It's exactly what they need.
Thank you. And I hope I was clear and not confusing. It tends to be a complicated issue. In some cases, it's made to be complicated on purpose. But it really, right now, is very simple. We have an opportunity to ban the slaughter of horses entirely, but that has to be done by banning it for both human and animal consumption.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.